It's Gretchen, and I conducted an exploratory case study on decision-making in King County regarding landfill alternatives. And this is a picture of the Cedar Hills Regional Landfill. It covers 1.4 square miles in unincorporated King County, and it's been the county's preferred method of waste disposal since 1965. And here is a map of the cells. So cells in gray have been filled and are no longer in use. King County is currently disposing of their waste in Area 9, and the case in focus is King County's recent decision to expand this landfill into its final cell called Area 9. So what led them to this decision? This is a snapshot of about 20 years of planning. Events in yellow are plans for landfill expansion along with their estimated closure date. So as you can see, this date continues to get pushed out with each plan. And to clarify, we're talking about a comprehensive solid waste management plan, which is ultimately a high-level visioning document with a 20-year horizon. It's basically a roadmap of how King County plans to manage their waste. And so you can see other events in red and green. These are moments when the King County Solid Waste Division considered landfill alternatives, specifically waste to energy. This is the division that's responsible for preparing these plans, presenting them to council to vote on and hopefully approve. And they define waste to energy, or WTE, as technologies that convert your waste to energy, which includes incineration and mass burn. And as you can see, these two studies done in red did not recommend waste to energy for King County. And then more recently, two studies did recommend waste to energy. And they bookend the county's most recent plan for landfill expansion, which was approved in April of 2019. And this ultimately commits the county to landfilling for the next 20 years, which is where my question began. So why did King County council members choose to approve this plan and ultimately expand their landfill? To answer this, I conducted an exploratory case study using coded news articles, a map of air quality complaints, and semi-structured interviews as my data. I framed this research within the theories of rationalism and incrementalism. And in the context of this study, rationalism would mean council members had all the data necessary to make the most rational decision possible. Incrementalism would mean the council member leaned more on the business as usual side of things. Then I also borrowed from the strategic business / legal world by applying the PESTI model, which originally is 5 factors. It's politics, economics, social, technology, and environment. But I expanded this to include waste quality and quantity because that's the subject that I'm researching. So to begin, I sourced 32 news articles and 3 opinion articles to really just get a better understanding of how this decision was being discussed regionally. And I concluded that all of the news articles were very neutral. However, they spoke to economic factors the most and social factors the least. And then from this, I developed 2 themes, one being what the public thought the county should do with their waste, and then what the county themselves thought they should do with their waste. So being that waste to energy is an expensive investment, there was concern about how that cost was going to fall back on the ratepayers. However, most references to public opinion came from landfill neighbors or people residing within a mile of the landfill who are not happy to be so close to a landfill that's operating. And they ultimately were advocating, some of them were actually vocalizing approval of something like waste to energy for King County. And then there was debate internally about what the county should do. So the solid waste division ultimately was just explaining their reasoning for recommending landfill expansion to the county. And then there was one council member who was strongly advocating for waste to energy. So ultimately it's a controversial topic. Then I filed a public records request with the Puget Sound Clean Air Agency and received over 2,000 air quality complaints. So this is the agency responsible for monitoring and managing air quality issues for the entire county. And in my request, I specified any complaint that mentioned the landfill in any capacity and from any time period. So this gave me a time range of 1994 all the way to 2020. So jumping into this map I made, this is King County. I broke it down by district and vote. So the districts colored green are council members that voted to approve the plan Red are council members who voted to reject the plan, and then gray are council members who recused themselves from the vote. So this plan ultimately passed 5-2. And then zooming in a bit, you can, oh, that's new. You can see, let me try to flip that back. Well, here we go. Okay, you can see that of the records I received, all of the complaints they fall within the 2 districts that voted to reject the plan. And and most of them surround the landfill, which is, oops, right here. And which that makes sense since there are collecting complaints regarding the landfill. However, the farthest one away was from 13 miles. I'm gonna try to, nope, okay. So zooming in even further, you can see an aerial view, a little tilted, of the landfill. Oh man, so sorry, there we go. Okay, so this landfill by law has to maintain a 1,000-foot buffer between its operations and the surrounding community. Each of these red dots represents one complaint. So the more intense the color is, the more complaints happened at that location. Complaints are color coded also by odor, noise, and dust. So all the red ones are odor, by far the majority. So jumping into one of these, you can see an overview of the case, hopefully. This tells you what type of issue is being experienced, the date and time it was recorded to the agency, and then whether the agency took any action on this, which would look like either a phone call to the resident or a visit to their actual location to assess the issue themselves, or even bumping that complaint higher up the chain of command. And then you can also read any comments that were left by the resident or the agent. I also wanted to include any locations that I thought might have vulnerable populations associated with them. So from this vantage point, you can see there's one park, there's one elementary school, there is a wedding venue / Christmas tree farm, as well as a rehab facility for formerly incarcerated women, all within 1 mile of the landfill. So being that these were also time-stamped, I wanted to map them over time to see if any patterns emerged. And from this, I ultimately concluded that there are ebbs and flows in the level of complaints or the frequency of complaints each year. There's not a consistent amount of issues every year from the records I received. And then one disclaimer is that I only received one installment from the agency, and I wasn't told what percentage of this represents total complaints. So I can only make inferences about what I received. And then the human side of living next to a landfill. So from the odor complaints, this odor was described as gassy, terrible, overwhelming, not breathable, like blueberries and diarrhea, a chemical cocktail, and garbage in hot plastic bags. Then multiple complainants also referenced large birds picking up waste and dropping it on their property / roofs, being woken up in the middle of the night from construction noises or gas or odor coming into their house, and then also just general concern and stress about feeling trapped with their property because they wouldn't be able to sell it, given these issues. And then I was fortunate enough to be able to speak to one landfill neighbor who shared a story with me about why he no longer lives next to the landfill, and I'll read that now. So we were just about done with our dream home when the 2013 pipeline break happened. It smelled like our neighbor's propane tank had ruptured. We had bright red faces that night, trouble breathing, itchy eyes and throats. We had no idea what was going on. I called the fire department and had them show up at the landfill to see if it was the bioenergy plant. And the gate was locked. The landfill had no clue. My nightmare with the landfill lasted 6 years from the pipeline break until I was done with the lawyers. The whole street on our side of the landfill, the houses are now gone. The county bought and demolished them. This is a photo of the dream home he's talking about, and its proximity to the gas to energy plant, which is located on the landfill. So finally, I wanted to get a more intimate understanding of the decision-making process, as well as the overall waste management experience in King County. So I interviewed 10 people. I spoke with 4 council members. One of those council members, chief of staff, 1 policy advisor on solid waste to a council member that I wasn't able to speak to, 1 waste to energy consultant hired by the division who ultimately recommended they pursue waste to energy, and then 3 landfill neighbors. And I asked, being that they were in the room where it happened, as they say, I asked the council members and the representative policy advisor to rank the PES 2 factors in order of importance to how they or their representative council member may have voted on the plan. And what I found interesting is that only politics Environment and waste quality and quantity ranked highest among all 5 of them. Next came technology, and then social and economics. And then there were multiple takeaways from all of my conversations, one being that nobody thinks landfilling is ideal or the best option for waste disposal. Rather, it's more of a necessary evil. Another one being that by expanding the landfill, the county was buying themselves 20 years worth of time in order to better prepare and plan and ultimately make a decision about what to do next, as well as the landfill is seen as an asset that the county would like to maximize. So if they weren't going to expand into that final cell, they would essentially be leaving money on the table. And then waste to energy was ultimately 50-50. People were either convinced or intrigued by it being viable for King County. They were on the yes side of things. And then the other half were intrigued but not convinced, specifically by the technology and possible environmental impacts it may have. And then deference was something that I hadn't considered prior to my research, but one of my biggest takeaways, and I'll speak to that a little bit later, but ultimately, most people that I interviewed, especially the council members, spoke to their need to defer their opinion to another expert, being that they weren't themselves experts on the issue at hand. And then incrementalism I found to be also very important. It's also one of my theories that I'm basing this all off of. So to read some of these quotes that I found representative of incrementalism, one council member who voted to approve the plan said, "There's a point at which you can't stop the next cell from being used. We've built it, we've opened it, we've used it, but that doesn't mean the next thing will need to be a waste of energy as opposed to rail shipments." The council member who voted to reject the plan said, "The county is going to have to figure out what to do about their obsolete landfill. That's a heavy list, and frankly, I'm very concerned that they'll just keep kicking the can down the road." A landfill neighbor said, "You're still faced with this genuinely free thing that's out there and working well in your view, and you're being told it's working well by the division, of course, versus something you have to go pay for. I think it's a pretty easy choice for any council member to make, no matter what your Republican or Democrat stripes are." And then the waste to energy consultant said, "If you have somebody who keeps patching up a sinking ship, they know how to patch it up and keep it running, but it's still sinking." So from this, I have 2 conclusions. One being that all of the council members that I spoke to were rational in their decision-making. From all of my conversations with them, they gave rational reasoning for voting the way that they did. And ultimately, they were handed a 471-page plan that they had to read, learn about, digest, and then ultimately vote on. So to also read a quote from the chief of staff of the council member who voted to reject the plan. "Every council member has their passion issue, whatever it may be, so that drives some of their interest in how much they're going to dig into the plan and shape their opinions. We all only have the capacity to do so much." And then if a council member either wasn't passionate about waste to energy or solid waste management in general, or this just wasn't one of their key issues, they deferred their opinion and ultimately their vote to the solid waste division's recommendation for a landfill expansion. And to read a quote from a council member who voted to approve the plan: "Legislators of any level are a mile wide and an inch deep. We choose what issues to dive into and become policy experts on because we can't be experts in everything that comes before us." And then my second conclusion is that the King County Solid Waste Division acted incrementally in developing the plan. Ultimately, this landfill has a long history of expansion, which has created, in a way, a norm when it comes to planning. Also, the division sees this land as an asset that they want to maximize. Also, infrastructure projects come with a lot of risk and uncertainty, and this is measured as cost from the division's perspective. To read a quote from another council member who voted to approve the plan that speaks to this a little bit: "Government, especially local government, needs to deliver. So it's really easy when you're in operations to get committed to, why am I going to take a risk on something new when I know this works and I don't know if I can deliver on that other path. So that risk looks too big to me." And then finally, I found one quote from a landfill neighbor to be inspirational, if not just motivating. So I'll read that. "The folks that laid the phone lines down had no idea that the internet was going to come along. The internet came along in the 80s and 90s and has changed our world in many ways, for better and worse, but it changed our world. What we need to do is lay the phone lines and let your kids, and my grandkids innovate. Goddamn, you have to look 100 years out. If we keep building these landfills up, they aren't going away. When we start thinking about it long-term, how is this thing going to impact us in 50 years? Start making these social decisions today. I know they're difficult politically. I know they're difficult economically. I know they're not at the top of your constituents' minds, but those are the sort of tough choices that we have to start making today in order to make a difference tomorrow. So ultimately, one last thing, I'd really like to thank everyone who contributed to my thesis, be it just giving me direction advice or actually participating in an interview, and then also Sean for all of her patience and knowledge and just direction with my thesis, and then my family and friends who supported me along the way. Thank you.